of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Today is the fourth feast of the presentation of the Virgin into the temple, which is one of the 12 great feasts of the church. And as is the custom here, when the Vespers of a feast falls upon a Sunday Eve, we conjoin the Vespers for that service with the Divine Liturgy. And so we'll have a lot of prayers and stuff. So we're celebrating the fourth feast and the beginning of the feast with Vespers in this service. And so it's an appropriate time for us to sort of institute the new ministry of the handmaidens who are helping serve during the Divine Liturgy. This ministry, you know, it first, as far as I know, it first originated in the Patriarch of Antioch over in Syria, and they've been doing it for quite some time. Having girls over there. I mean, leave it to persecuted Christians in the Middle East to be the more progressive ones. So they have been doing it over there. They've been doing it in the Greek Archdiocese as well, in various metropolises, and in our own cathedral they've been doing it for the past year, and it's been a very successful ministry they've had. It's actually had the effect of making the altar boys better servers because they have a little competition. So nothing wrong with that. So it's a wonderful ministry to have in the church. And it's good for a number of reasons, because it's important that we invest in the leadership of women at a young age in our church, because when you say to a certain group of people that there's not a place for you to serve, or if you give impressions that some people are second-class citizens in the church, it has the result of making someone sort of disengage and lose interest and sort of become passive. And I can tell you what, we can't survive passive people in the church, whether they're men or women, because we need to be active, right? We don't have some sort of luxury of a society where all the government and cultural forces basically force you to be in church. You know, we don't have that, okay? You know, and there's some good things that come with not having that, all right? But the point is that we have to have people in our church who are committed. And there's no better way to have someone develop a deep love and commitment to the church than by having them participate and serve. When you serve, right, when you give something, right, then you have a sense of preciousness for that thing, right? If you have a marriage and you have people who are married and you sacrifice one another, there's a great love. If you take people who are strangers, you put them in a situation where they suffer together, there's a bond that's formed, right? When you pay a lot of money for something, how do you treat that object, right? You treat it with a greater respect because it costs you something. And so it's the same thing in the church when we have young people. We have to make sure that we're giving them opportunities to serve, right? So that they are engaged for the course of their life. Like, here, I'm going to point out two people as an example. I'm going to point out Daria and Ben, right? As examples of people who... Daria's looking around like, what are you talking about? But look, like, Daria started singing in the youth choir when she was really young, right? I mean, look, she's still singing in the choir, and those were great memories. I mean, many of the people who are still in church today, who are still serving in an active way in the church, if you look at their lives, you'll see that very early on, they were pulled aside, they were involved, and they were serving the church in some way before they were adults. And it's the same thing with Ben. Ben got pulled aside by the choir director in Passaic who showed him how to read, how to sing, how to do these things. It has an effect, okay, when you invest in this way in young people. And it's important to remember that there's no second-class citizens in the church. Women from a very early period in the church had a very prominent role in the church. If you look in the Gospels, I mean, you just have to start with the Virgin Mary, who is the very throne of God, right? That the prayers say, even in today's services. She got to bear God the Word, right? I mean, you have her, you have the women. Women were the only ones who stood by the cross with Christ, right? They were the first ones to witness the resurrection and to come to the tombs. They were the benefactors. If you look, I mean, you look close, you don't realize this. The women were payrolling the ministry of Christ. This is talked about in the Gospels. They were the ones who were raising the funds and who were managing it for the ministry. You have in Paul's letters, if you look at, usually at the end or the beginning of his letters, right, the epistles we read, he's constantly referencing, like, he's basically giving shout-outs is the equivalent today. He's saying, say hello to so-and-so and greet them in peace. And there are a lot of women that are mentioned in the epistles. I mean, a lot. He even calls one of them an apostle. And so, like, one of the 7, so like, there is some pretty radical stuff that's going on in the New Testament with the role of women. There's Saint Phoebe, who's mentioned in the Epistle to the Romans, calls her a deaconess in the New Testament. Of course, you wouldn't know that because it gets obscured. They use different words for it, like servant or something like that. Okay, so you wouldn't notice that. But it's the word diakonos. So where we get the word deacon, which just means to serve or to minister. It's the same word. So we have that in Paul's epistles as well, and they had leadership roles. You have St. John Chrysostom, who's praising St. Phoebe as a deaconess, who's a great model of virtue and leadership in the church. You have think of some of the great martyrs, St. Catherine, St. Barbara, who were had great intellects, were powerful, who stood up to men. I mean, St. Catherine got martyred because she stood up and she debated philosophy with other philosophers in Alexandria, talking about that. And she ended up being martyred for that. You have so many examples of strong, wise, and devoted women in the life of the church, all around us. There are so many women saints. And so women have had this role, and they have a role as deaconess especially. And I want to give you a little background of that so you want to understand that office, which you don't really see today anymore. Though, in 2005, that office was restored in Greece. The Church of Greece restored the office of the deaconess in 2005. And you had Saint Elizabeth, the new martyr in Russia, who took her nuns and basically turned them into deaconesses, and her order of nuns in Russia, even to this day, they dress differently, and they go around and they do basically social and charitable work in a pretty aggressive manner. But the deaconesses is obviously we have it right from the early church with St. Phoebe, and their primary role was to baptize and to catechize women, okay, and to minister to the needs of women. And you have to understand why this was really critical for the church is because, one, guess what? Baptized in the nude, even as an adult, okay, in the early church. All right? So be grateful we don't do that anymore, Christian, because you might have been a little embarrassed. I was going to say like Mark and Daniel, but they were already baptized, so we didn't have to do that to them. But so the women deaconesses, the men priests did not do women's baptisms. They did not do it. Okay? The women baptized other women. So you had deaconesses to do that purpose. So they're baptized in the nude, and you also had there's a much greater separation of the sexes in ancient culture. You see that a little bit more if you go to more traditional cultures around the world today. I mean, does anyone remember growing up where women stood on this side of the church and men stood on this side? Okay, all right. A few people remember that. In some places around the world, you'll still run into that. Okay, and depending on things, you'll see kind of more of a separation. Like, you ever seen on videos of an Orthodox Jewish wedding, right? And how the men and women are totally separate, and they hold them up on those chairs, right? Well, they do that because there's a curtain. That party is separated right down the middle, where everyone's dancing, but women are on one side dancing, men are on the other, and they hold them up so they can see each other. That's the whole thing of the chairs, right? Is because there's a really strict separation of the sexes. We don't have that anymore, okay? So it doesn't. Some of those roles of having to do that don't seem as relevant, but it's still a relevant thing to have people of similar genders ministering to other people of the same genders. For a whole lot of reasons. I don't have to get into today, but you can imagine. And so it's a helpful thing. Now, the deaconess kind of fell out of use largely for two main reasons. One, because we stopped baptizing in the nude, adults. That sort of fell out of use. And we stopped having adult baptisms, in a large part. Because you had these whole cultures where everyone's Orthodox or everyone's Catholic, and you're like, well, we're not really baptizing any adults much anymore, so we don't really, so that need sort of slowly fell out of use. But there's canons relating to the regulation of deaconesses into the 8th or 9th century, so sometime about the middle of the millennia, or what's the last millennia, it sort of it sort of seemed to fall out of use. But there is a movement within the church in this country to bring it back. There's the Society of St. Phoebe, which is educating and trying to push for this kind of thing. I mean, Lord knows we could use more help of leaders and people serving in the church. I mean, we have a shortage of deacons in the church, a really bad shortage of deacons, and we have a very acute shortage of priests, in certain places in this country as well. It's everywhere. So, we could use all the help we could get in a lot of ways like this. So this is just to remind us that this feast day, the reason we started this ministry on this feast day was because what did the Virgin Mary do on this feast day? What happened? She was brought to the temple, dedicated to the temple as a temple virgin, served in the temple, and went into the what? The Holy of Holies. Now to appreciate this, okay? Only the high priest went in there, okay? Not all priests, just one priest, just a man, and only once a year. Zechariah, who was the high priest at that time, was divinely inspired and brought her into the Holy of Holies. And the tradition is that she lived in the temple. It was fed by the Archangel Gabriel with, like heavenly bread and all this stuff. And you'll see that on the icon. You'll see that's this stuff depicted. And so the point is that, I had Genevieve one time, she was talking to Bishop Michael, and she said, why can't girls serve in the church, Nuns serve, which they do. If you go to a monastery for nuns, who's touching the altar? Who's cleaning it? Who's holding the candles? Who's doing the censing? It's all nuns doing all of that. Now, she said, well, I'm not married, and nuns aren't married, so why can't I serve? And the Virgin Mary, she went into the temple, she went into the altar, so why can't other girls? It's not a good answer for that. But, so I'll leave you at a cliffhanger right there, okay? So, but the point is, that we must be reminded of the words of the Apostle Paul that in Christ there is neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, male nor female. But there is absolute equality before God as we all stand before Him. And that is one of the important things of the church, is that when you strip everything else away and you get down to the spiritual life, to our character, our virtue, our integrity of who we are as human beings, we're all the same. We're all equal. When we die, we will leave all this stuff that makes us different, and the only thing we will have left is who we are on the inside. That is why we devote so much attention in the church to our inner life. That's why hopefully we come to church, so that we can work on something that is a higher priority than other stuff, and we can invest in something that is longer lasting. And we need to be reminded of that again and again, because we forget and we get distracted. And it is a good reminder to remember, no matter how different somebody is than us, whether they're male or female, whether they voted for this guy or that woman, okay, whether they're a jerk or they're really nice, okay, they're equal with us. Lord Jesus Christ.